I've finally figured out why Drive to Survive doesn't seem to be able to engage with passionate F1 fans. So I watched the entirety of Season 7 in just one day, 7 hours of TV in one day, and I'm looking at it from a passionate fan's point of view, and it finally clicked. It's because it's reality TV. Now we're going to go through episode by episode. The season starts strong, it has a bit of a filler middle, but ends on a really strong note. So before we get some started, a couple of little interesting facts. So first of all, almost 40% of Drive to Survive viewers are based in the US, so it's very much aimed at an American audience, although a lot of F1 fans tend to be European. This is highlighted by the fact that in some of the subtitles, they spell tyre, T-I-R-E. Also, 1 in 4 of Drive to Survive viewers don't actually watch F1 itself. It's almost become its own entity, and that really highlights that it's a reality TV look that's based on F1 and not really a proper look at F1. Let's dig into why that is. So starting with episode 1 then, and honestly straight away you get a feel for how over-dramatised Drive to Survive is. It's a really dramatic intro, but overall a decent episode. It was based mainly on Christian Horner, to be honest, but also kind of introducing the season. There was a couple of little interesting bits. Hamilton, for example, said that Mercedes won't win again. I'm presuming he meant a championship rather than a race, but that was quite a surprising omission. Apparently also they changed Horner's swear word from a C word to a P word in the edit, which is a real surprise, but again, kind of highlights that it's just sort of reality TV. It's aimed at an American audience. Americans don't tend to use the C word very much, as far as I can gather, so a bit of a weird thing to change. I also found this episode a bit of a weird mix of testing and practice. It was almost like, you know, some of the driver reactions were them trying the car for the first time. Croft even says at one point that, oh, you know, practice starts here. But then they just jump straight into the race. They completely skip over qualifying, which is arguably the most important, interesting qualifying of the year, the first qualifying of the year. It's the first time we get to find out the proper pecking order. They completely skipped over that, which was a bit of a weird one. I think it was a good episode, but they just didn't really cover the on-track stuff very well at all. But again, kind of highlighting that it's reality TV. But then we get on to the second episode, and honestly, this felt a bit less reality TV-like. So the episode was called Frenemies, and basically it was all about Lando Norris, essentially, but also a bit of Max Verstappen, obviously, this sort of rivalry those guys have. Kind of theme of Drive to Survive seems to be that they make it quite obvious what's about to happen. So they went on and on about like Lando no wins, you know, going on about that and how he hadn't managed to win yet. And it's like, well, obviously he's going to win in this episode. Like it was just so obvious. But anyway, Lando does eventually get his first win in Miami in the episode. Overall, though, I felt like they told the story really well. I felt like this represented F1 quite well. Yes, it didn't have the, you know, the proper details. I think if you were to jump straight into watching F1 after watching this episode, you wouldn't have a clue what's going on. But other than that, I felt like it, you know, captured the emotion of getting your first win, and they built up well. And I think it overall told F1 quite well in episode 2. Episode 3 is called Looking Out for Number 1, and basically this episode is all about Mercedes trying to find a replacement for Lewis Hamilton. Overall, again, pretty good episode. It wasn't too reality TV like this one. A couple of bits though. This is the episode I saw them use the word tyre in the subtitles. It wasn't the only time, but this is the first time that I noticed it. I noticed that they were braking / downshifting in Eau Rouge. Just one of those little things that like a passionate hardcore F1 fan sees that and just goes like, what? I mean, there was a few examples of this season, but it's just one of those sort of immersion breaking things. You know, it's a bit like the sort of Fast and Furious films when they just constantly just find another gear. It's like, doesn't matter that much, but like, that's just not how it really works. Another oddity, they showed George Russell winning Spa, but they didn't mention that he got disqualified. Like, they genuinely just didn't mention it at all, as if it didn't happen. Now look, don't get me wrong, they were basically building up that George Russell is a good enough number 1 driver that Mercedes were confident enough to hire a rookie in the second seat. This is just a perfect example how F1 is, how Drive to Survive is loosely based on F1 without really representing the sport very well. Overall, though, I felt like they covered the signing of Antonelli quite well. I think they got across, you know, the emotion of him being signed and stuff. I think overall that was quite well handled. But yeah, so overall a decent episode. I did like it. Obviously some oddities that we just covered, but overall, I felt like it was largely representative of F1, barring those sort of immersion breaking elements we also mentioned. Episode 4 was called Carlos Sainz. Now, this was obviously about who Carlos Sainz was going to sign for. Again, I felt like it was an alright episode, but this is where we start to get to the sort of filler episodes, honestly, which that's what they felt like anyway, season 7 of Drive to Survive, because I'm just not sure we need an entire episode, 42 minutes worth, dedicated to who Carlos Sainz was going to sign for. They did have in the episode that Carlos stood up Williams. They literally had everything ready for him and then he just didn't show up. When you think about this as reality TV, I'm going to take that with a massive pinch of salt. I got no idea if that happened or not, but it was an interesting thing if it did happen. Yes, it was interesting, but I think they probably could have merged this in with maybe just like a silly season episode where they also cover the Mercedes signing and stuff. Just felt, yeah, filler. Next up, episode 5 is Le Curse of Leclerc. Again, very, very obvious storyline. Now, look, I know it's based on real life and this stuff has already happened, but remember, this isn't really aimed at passionate F1 fans. It's aimed at a casual viewer, 1 in 4 of which don't even watch F1. But it was still very obvious that Charles Leclerc was going to win the Monaco Grand Prix. So, they were just, again, going on about, oh, he's so cursed, he's never won Monaco, oh, yada, 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 going on and on about it. Like, obviously, this means he's going to win it this time, and he does. But other than that, I do feel like overall they got across the sort of specialness of the Monaco Grand Prix quite well. Like, not quite as good as I think as a passionate F1 fan would feel about it, but not a million miles off. So overall, yeah, I think this was a decent episode. Episode 6 was called Wheels of Fortune. Now, this is basically all about McLaren's team play, I guess, across the season. We saw them obviously struggling with 2 number 1 drivers throughout 2024 and things like that, and strategy. So it kind of covered that, which was largely interesting. A couple of interesting tidbits. Horner actually said that he would sign Oscar Piastri over Lando Norris, which I don't think we'd heard about before. Now, it's not often you get some direct comparisons like that from a leading team principal. We know Christian Horner's a bit political, take it with a pinch of salt, but he said that. He directly was asked, who would you sign? He said, Oscar over Lando. Surprising. McLaren also said, in real life, they were sort of after the Monza Italian Grand Prix, where Piastri did that awesome move on Lando Norris. They then introduced team orders, but the kind of public line was that, oh, not much has changed. We haven't really got many rules. Yeah, they've just been a bit vague. But actually, we found out from this that basically the wording they had behind the scenes was, we want to avoid the cars coming close to contact. That's the sort of rule they made internally, which honestly makes sense. Like, you can fight, but we don't want any moves that are remotely close to the cars coming together, which honestly is smart. And obviously we did see after that as well, a few team orders and stuff that did help Lando, ultimately didn't help overall. But overall, again, quite an interesting insight. I didn't mind this episode. It was largely interesting to what happened behind the scenes there at McLaren. Again, not massively insightful, but overall, I think a worthwhile episode. Episode 7, though, was a little bit weird. This one was called In the Heat of the Night. And basically, the entire episode was on Singapore. And it genuinely felt a bit like an ad. Okay, we had an episode dedicated to Monaco, fine, I get it. But Monaco, I feel like, is more special than Singapore, whichever way you cut it. So I don't really know why we had a whole episode that was just on Singapore. I think the only thing I could think of is that we had the Qatar Grand Prix in 2023, which was, massively physical on the drivers. So they wanted an episode where they get across the physicality of F1 and how athletic they need to be and how fit they need to be. And honestly, I feel like they did do that quite well. Like, after the race, we saw George Russell. I mean, honestly, we only had the audio, but it sounded like he's having a panic attack because he was just so heat exhausted. So I thought that element was quite cool to really get across that these guys aren't just jokers that are messing about on TV, reality TV stars. They are proper athletes, and some of these races are very extreme. So I like that part. I also like the fact that a lot of this episode was filmed by the drivers. It sounds like Drive to Survive basically gave a couple of the drivers a phone and got them to film stuff. I quite like that. I wouldn't want the whole season to be based on that, but I thought that was quite a nice touch. But yeah, this episode also seemed to introduce the drivers again. Like, we're on episode 7 now, season 7, episode 7. And they felt I need to reintroduce a lot of the drivers that were featured, which just felt a bit weird. But honestly, that's true to the whole season. Like, every episode feels like it's almost like a mini film at the start of every episode. Quite often, for example, they'll repeat races. They showed Silverstone multiple times. They showed Brazil multiple times. So, it's not designed to be, in time order, in race order or anything like that. But it still feels like they've just got to almost start from scratch at the start of every episode, which is a little bit weird. But yeah, overall, I thought this was a worthwhile episode. I don't think it needed to be so centric around Singapore. It really did feel like an ad for Singapore. But other than that, I liked it. It showed the drivers in a good light. It showed how athletic it needs to be. Thumbs up from me. Episode 8 was called Elbows Out. Now, this episode was all about Red Bull considering Sergio Perez's replacement. Can you see the theme here? We've had multiple episodes now on what is essentially silly season. This could have and should have been one episode, honestly. Again, it was a fine episode. Like, they had Ricardo back in. Obviously, Ricardo's a Drive to Survive favourite. They had him saying bye to Drive to Survive, a bit of a, over dramatic farewell. They also had Lawson being introduced. Honestly, I felt like Ricardo came across quite well, and Lawson really didn't, to be honest. Lawson didn't come across as a very good person from this episode of Drive to Survive. Kind of interesting bits. Horner said, there's no guarantees that Perez will make it to the end of the season, which is not what they were saying in public at the time. So that was quite interesting. Again, they show Silverstone again in this episode. Previously they showed the Mercedes and McLaren guys at the front. Now they're showing the Red Bull guys, VCARB guys a little bit further back. So showing the same race again. One thing I will say though, is they showed the incident between Lawson and Perez at Mexico, where Perez goes for down the inside of Lawson, but Lawson basically comes back across and gives Perez damage at his home race. They actually showed that really well. And I feel like this highlights how good Drive to Survive can be. They just told the whole story so well. They built up the fact that Lawson had just come in. He just binned off Ricardo. He's in VCARB. He's trying to prove himself. He's trying to get the drive from Perez. Meanwhile, Perez is under massive pressure to perform. He's at his home race. They hyped it up as well. Perez goes for a move on Lawson. Lawson doesn't yield. He then comes across on him. There's damage. Both cars are damaged. It's a real dramatic moment, and it's a real life dramatic moment. All those things are completely true. They don't need extra hype, and they didn't give it extra hype because they didn't need it. And then afterwards, they showed essentially Lawson getting a bit told off by Christian Horner. There was a quote by, I can't remember who it was. Somebody said basically like, you just don't do that. It might have been Claire Williams. You just don't, as a sister team, you just don't come out and damage the other car. Like, whether you think he drove badly or not, like, it's just not good. And they just told that story really well. I thought it was really well told. That was a real highlight of the season for me. They also covered the private Silverstone test they did with Max Verstappen, and they said that Lawson was about 0.2 off Max, which was pretty good. So yeah, overall worthwhile episode. Just felt a bit unnecessarily long. Episode 9, again, felt a bit more fillery, but also was important. So this one was called Under New Management. And basically, it was Haas versus Alpine, essentially, for 6th in the Constructors' Championship. So they briefly got Gunther Steiner on to basically bin him off immediately. Kind of covered Haas's evolution and the background to their teams. And they covered Flavio Briatore coming into Alpine. And they mostly covered all that quite well. But there was only one episode in all of Season 7 that covered teams outside the top 4, which is like, okay, most people are interested in them. And I prefer this format to what they've done previously, where you almost get an episode per team. I don't think that works at all. But there's more stories than just this. But still, look, this was the biggest story. Which midfield team's going to get P6 in the Constructors? This was the biggest one. But, and this is a real perfect example of how Drive to Survive just does not convert well to real F1. So they covered the Alpine double podium, right, which was obviously huge in securing them P6. But they didn't mention the fact that there was any safety cars or any red flags in the Brazilian Grand Prix. And for anyone who knows remotely what they're talking about in F1, not even that, the most basic of F1 fans knows that the reason, certainly at the time, you may have forgotten, they know the reason is Alpine got a double podium was because of a red flag. Everyone else pit, they stayed out, and there was a red flag which allowed them to change their tyres for free. That is why they got a double podium. They mention a little bit of luck here and there and stuff, but like, they just completely just deleted the fact there was a red flag and what any of that means. And it's just like, that is so crucial to that storyline. And this is why 1 in 4 Drive to Survive fans don't watch F1, because it doesn't translate well. If you look at it like a separate, completely separate reality TV series, fine, whatever. But surely F1 themselves would want Drive to Survive viewers to be converting to watching F1. Anyway, it was an alright episode. It just didn't feel very insightful, episode 9. Even ignoring the red flag stuff, it just wasn't that insightful, really. It was a very basic look at the story of fighting for P6. Now, episode 10, the season finale, very much an episode of 2 halves for me. So this one was called Endgame. It was all about, the championship, obviously. Who's going to win the championship at the end of the season? Fine, that makes sense. It started out, though, with a recap of the previous 9 episodes. It felt like it was almost like a start of a new season. Series do that sometimes where they recap what happened previously. It was like, why? Not everyone's binged it in a day, sure, but like, we need to recap the whole previous 9 episodes. I thought that was a bit weird. The first race they showed was Brazil, which, again, we only just saw in the previous episode. That's point number one. Point number two is that once again, they didn't show the red flag. They were like, oh yeah, Max went from 17th place to first. What a race. Again, a red flag was the crucial thing. Look, I'm going to leave it there, but come on. So they showed probably almost half the episode was about that Brazilian Grand Prix race because it was crucial. You know, Lando started pole, Max won it. That was crucial. But they then just skimmed over Max winning the actual championship. Like genuinely, it was about 20 minutes of Brazil. And then it was genuinely about 2 minutes of Max winning the championship in Vegas. It was just like, oh, and Max wins and he wins a title. Anyway, moving on. No, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like, they were level on points going into it or anything like that. But Drive to Survive was all about drivers as well. We just want a drivers championship. They barely mentioned it. That almost felt like spite or something. The fact that Max clearly doesn't, I don't think Max was featured in an actual Drive to Survive interview, for example, in season 7. So it was just weird to skim over that. Anyway, whatever. This is where the episode gets much better because Abu Dhabi, I really felt like they told that story really, really well. It showed Hamilton's last race of Mercedes and how much that meant. It showed McLaren obviously being really happy with winning the constructors. It showed, Alpine, the fact that Doohan was in and things like that. It really felt like it summarized the finale really well. Lots of people doing their final races, obviously a championship decider. I just felt like it was really good. It told the story of that F1 race and why that F1 race was significant for a number of reasons, and it told that well. And for me, that's what Drive to Survive should be doing personally. One weird oddity though, there was some actual sped up footage of a Haas in Abu Dhabi. Now, look, like the downshifting stuff in Eau Rouge that I mentioned earlier, like annoying, but not the end of the world. Like a lot of it's not, the radio's being played at slightly different times. Not the end of the world. Sped up footage? Come on. That's got to be a real red line that we can't cross. Awful. Anyway, whatever. But yeah, overall, really liked that episode. Obviously, the first half wasn't amazing, but it wasn't disastrously bad. The second half was really good, and it really finished off season 7 of Drive to Survive well. So overall then, Drive to Survive, where is it at for a passionate F1 fan? Well, first of all, I've got to give a shout out to Will Buxton. Will Buxton is honestly what holds Drive to Survive together for people like me. He has got a beautiful way of explaining things. He doesn't go into massive detail because he doesn't need to, but he's got a beautiful way of summarizing why a moment is big in like one sentence. Honestly, he's not working in F1 from this season. I hope he keeps working in Drive to Survive because he is the anchor that makes this show remotely watchable for a passionate F1 fan. I also love that when they film someone in a car, they might film Zach Brown driving to a villa on a Wednesday. But what they'll do is they'll play radio as if it's like F1 news. And obviously that wasn't happening. Like there's no F1 news in the car when they're filming that. But that's the sort of thing that is perfect example of what they can take creative license over that makes the show better but doesn't detract from it in any way. But the team radio stuff is an issue for me. Like I said, I don't mind when they move it a little bit, but they just overdo it in a big way. I can pretty much guarantee you that most of the team radio they play out while we're watching cars on track is from probably not even that race. Like, they'll have someone a bit of contact and they'll just swear. And it's like, that could be from anywhere. Let me put this in context. Imagine for a second that I'm a very lucky boy and I get to drive an F1 car. It's probably never going to happen, but let's say it does, right? I make a YouTube video on the experience of getting to drive an F1 car. Imagine how special that would be, right? I have a microphone with me in the car to get my team, to get my raw emotion and reactions to the moment. Imagine how special that would be. Now imagine for a second that I don't use any of that footage and instead afterwards I go into a studio and I just record me going, oh, this is so special. What a feeling. And then just edit it in. Do you see how much worse that would be for that video, for that moment? And that is exactly what Drive to Survive do. If a driver hasn't reacted in a certain way to a certain incident, you don't need to force that reaction. That is a perfect example of how it's reality TV and it's not realistic. A bit of creative license is fine. You can't manufacture stuff. I don't like it. You have to remember as well that Drive to Survive is a behind the scenes series, but they work with the teams. So you're never going to get really, really juicy stuff. You'll get tidbits. Because let's be honest, if they accidentally, left a mic live somewhere and recorded some genuinely, maybe a driver's exact salary, like negotiations over how much a driver gets paid and the bonuses. We'd all find that so interesting, right? It'd be amazing if they included that. But if they did that, whoever team they just left that microphone on, they wouldn't work with them anymore. They'd be like, no, you're not coming in. No, get out. It's a team-friendly behind the scenes, isn't it? So bear that in mind. Also, did you notice how there wasn't any FIA drama mentioned? As passionate F1 fans, we know that one of the biggest talking points in F1 at the moment is the FIA drama. It's Mohammed Ben Sulayem meddling in FIA, making changes people aren't happy with, cracking down on swearing, and the dodgy call on Fernando Alonso in Australia, who, by the way, Aston Martin were barely mentioned this whole season. Adrian Newey wasn't mentioned. Huge news in F1. Massive. Not mentioned. It's not aimed at passionate F1 fans. And I think when you accept that it's loosely based in real life and that it's reality TV, once you've accepted that, I think Drive to Survive is fine. I'm not expecting a season review or a season recap because that would be boring, I get it. Each episode is a story. It doesn't need to be 3 races per episode and it's like races 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 9. It doesn't need to be that, but it could be story-based. It just needs to actually represent the sport. That's what I personally would like. But look, it's doing fine without me. 6.8 million viewers for Drive to Survive. 63% of viewers watched 3 episodes in a row, so it's clearly quite addictive. 46% of viewers are female, which is massively higher than F1, so that's fantastic. As I said before, almost 40% of viewers are US-based, whereas UK is only 12%, for example. But 1 in 4 Drive to Survive fans aren't interested in the sport, which to me is an issue. Doesn't have to be nerdy, doesn't have to be too detailed, you don't have to go into the nitty-gritty. There's just enough stories in F1. We don't need to make them up. That's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think of it down in the comments. And don't forget to drop a follow if you haven't already, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye.